on Healing Horizons. Today with Saima, we are joined by our amazing guest, Reginald Martin, a spiritual architect, metaphysician, and creator of Physics, a practice that bridges ancient wisdom with modern healing. His work with Paradoxical reveals how to integrate conflict, reclaim sovereignty, and transform identity at the deepest level. Now, this is going to be a journey into the hidden systems that shape us and how to transcend them. So, Reginald, welcome to the show.
Saima, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited.
It's my it's my pleasure to have you here, Reginald. Now, you describe yourself as a spiritual architect, and that's so remarkable. So I wonder that what does that mean in the context of healing?
In the context of healing, a spiritual architect means that somebody that helps an individual to rebuild themselves from the inside out. Okay, because a lot of times what happens is that we have been taught in systems that have taught us that we're broken, that something's wrong with us, that we need to be fixed, and all this stuff. So that is a whole way of being and thinking, and I call that the ontology of being, and it's an what we call an ontology of brokenness. So as an architect, I switched that, and we get back to the ancient teachings where. With the ancient teachings, we are divine, okay, and that's the starting point. That we're not broken. That when things happen, we are misaligned, and we need to come back into balance. So, what we call as disease and things that happen in our life, it is actually misalignment that we need to realign with.
Mhm. The phrase spiritual architect already sparks curiosity, but like hearing you connected to healing gives it so much depth. And I really love the way you have explained that. Like your perspective makes the process feel both creative and grounded. And I think it gives people hope that healing isn't random, but something we can thoughtfully build into our lives.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the strongest things about paradoxical Heka is that it actually gives even practitioners who are, coaches and healers, it gives them a process that they literally can go step by step to help a person to heal, to help a person to become
Mhm.
whole again. Okay. So it's this very, very powerful in that sense.
Yes, that makes sense. Absolutely. So, was there a personal experience that first drew you to building this kind of inner architecture?
Oh yeah, Simon, it was just dealing with life, going through my ups and downs. I've always been a person that I've taken risks. So that means I take big swings at life. And when you take big swings, sometimes you have big falls. So just through that, the old systems that I was taught just really didn't work for me. And I didn't like the idea that I grew up in a religious family, and I was told that I was broken, unworthy, and all these things. Well, when you're going after your systems, or I'm sorry, when you're going after, your life and your achievements, you're going to achieve your goals, to
Hmm.
consider life in a way that you're broken, it ends up being like a lot of resistance. So I had to figure out and find ways that I wasn't adding resistance, that I was adding fuel to my fire, so to speak. So that's how I ended up discovering a lot of these ideas. Was I changed that ontology from brokenness to divine, and it just led me, one thing led me to another, and that's how I ended up just through the process of life, learning how to use these ideas in my life, and then teaching other people how to do it as well.
Hmm. The way you, first of all, thank you for sharing that, Reginald. And the way you describe going through life and how those experiences shape your path, it really highlights the depth behind what you do today. And it's a reminder, that the work you're offering isn't just theory or concepts, but something you have lived and felt. And I think listeners will really connect with the honest in that because so many of us can relate to the idea, that our struggle, our turning points often become the very foundation for the wisdom we are able to share with others.
Oh, absolutely, and that's one of the things for me, Simon, is I really detest a lot of the what can I call it, the woo woo spirituality, where we're taught these ideas that, they sound good. And I like to say that, a lot of people can put together word salads, but the salad really has no depth for us. It's no fuel for our being. So it really comes down to how can we practically apply this information and knowledge, and that's where paradoxical Hecka comes in for me, is that it takes it beyond woo woo and it makes it a science. And when I say a science, I mean that it is something you can test, you can hypothesize, and then you can recalibrate and then try it again if something is not working. But you get a foundation and a framework for testing these ideas rather than just trying to theoretically live through them.
That's profound, Reginald. Now, paradoxical Hega already sounds fascinating. So, how would you explain it to someone encountering the idea for the very first time?
Yeah, so it's really, and what I like about these concepts is that they are really simple. Okay, so when we're talking about paradoxical Heccup, the idea of paradox itself is that it is this and that. Okay, so in other words, when we're talking about the universe, everything in the universe is, everything in the universe exists, and everything in the universe is valid. Okay, so that means you are too. So when we're talking about in the ontology of brokenness, we're made to be adversaries to ourselves in a lot of ways. So we can take our shadow self and we can but a lot of times what people do is they take the shadow and say that the shadow is something that you either should bypass by being, positive spiritual affirmations, and you never address the shadow, or the shadow is something that you have to fix, or something that you need to avoid. Okay. But the reality of the deal is the shadow is an aspect of us, just like it's an aspect of the universe, it's an aspect of us. And we have to integrate the whole of us. In other words, we have to integrate this shadow and that light. So it has to be this and that in order to be whole, rather than we are making ourselves adversarial to the shadow, whereas this or that. And that's a lot of times how society has taught us to handle a lot of these things. So paradoxical
Mhm.
Hecka helps you to integrate your being rather than you fighting your being.
I really like that, Reginald, that how broke that down in such a simple way. Like something that could sound complex suddenly feels very approachable when you explain it like that. And the way you framed it makes it clear that paradoxical Heka isn't about overcomplicating things, it's about seeing truth and simplicity and noticing how those layers can work together. And I think listeners will surely appreciate how grounded and accessible your explanation is.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and it's for me, Simon, is something I need simplicity, and all of us do when we're going through our difficulties, and I can think about just like what I call the abstract or woo woo spirituality. When we talk about the idea of surrender, okay, and I'm just going to break down paradoxical Hecka in that context, okay, of the idea of surrender. So usually when we're talking about people talk about surrender, we think of it as something passive, and that's the way a lot of times the woo woo is taught to us, that oh, you should just surrender to this or surrender to that, and Saima, for me, I'm not a passive type of an individual, but I also have learned that surrender is not something that is passive. Okay, so when we're talking about paradoxical Hecka, and surrender in this context is something that is an active process. Okay, so what that means is that we when we're talking about this and that, and we're talking about our shadow self, then we have to reconcile the shadow with our light. Okay, once we reconcile the shadow with our light, then it produces peace within us. Once that peace is produced, that's the surrender. Okay, The surrender is that you reconcile those opposites in order to create that third thing, which becomes the peace within ourselves. That is an active process. That's not something passive to where you're just waiting on something to happen, or you're just ignoring or bypassing the difficulties that you're dealing with in your life, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. That's really a powerful way to frame it, Reginald, because surrender is often misunderstood as giving up or losing control, but the way you connect it to paradoxical Heka shows it as something much deeper. And opening a release that actually allows more alignment and strength to come through. And I think that perspective is really liberating, Reginald, because it shifts surrender from being seen as weakness to being recognized as an active, intentional choice that creates space for healing and transformation.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly it. So, it's just and again, it's just something that I've had to learn through my life and through my own experience. I've never been able to surrender to, a bad experience or whatever. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing whatever I can do to change it. And how do I do that? And from a processing standpoint, or from a process or standpoint of a process, but that's where paradoxical Hecka gives you a map to run on. And I don't know if you're familiar with but how I actually even recognize this in ancient terminology was through the idea of the caduceus, okay, where the two snakes are intertwining around that central pole, okay. The ancients were actually giving us in symbolic language that process that I call paradoxical heka, because the two serpents are not fighting each other, they're intertwining with each other, they're working together to produce that light and that enlightenment that we have at the
Mm-hmm.
end. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense, Reginald. That's noteworthy. Now, your work blends symbolism, energy, breath, and voice. So, why do you think that modern healing often overlooks these ancient elements?
Yeah, I think, Simon, that they don't. Well, we get so many things fragmented in so many ways, and I think that that's really the biggest problem is that we just get fragments of this stuff, and people don't really connect the dots. And a lot of times they don't connect the dots because they look at it in a dogmatic way that it has to be this or that. But in reality, what you are doing, you have to. These ideas were meant to make us whole. They were meant to be different ways that we access our reality and our life to transform ourselves. They are tools to help us. They're processes to help us. But in society today, it's just really, really fragmented, and people take the fragments, but they don't really connect the dots to what it's supposed to do to help us transform.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's true. In our, fast-paced world, healing often gets reduced to, I think, surface level fixes or quick techniques. And we often, forget that these ancient elements you mentioned are deeply woven into what we are as human beings. And the way you explain it again, it makes it clear that they are not outdated ideas, but, timeless tools that reconnect us with something essential. And I really appreciate the way you brought that out.
Yes, and you said that in such a beautiful way too. It's just they are timeless. I mean, they don't. We look at them as something as old and outdated, but that's because again we've looked at it in the fragmented sense, and a lot of times in a literal sense. When these ideas are really at the core and they're frameworks of being, they're an ontology to teach us how to be from a soul level. Not just a physical person, but how do we merge mind, body, and soul to create a complete being?
Mm, absolutely. Now, do you believe bringing them back can accelerate transformation more than traditional talk-based methods?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times the traditional methods that we use, a lot of times it is so fragmented. I don't think people really go back and really take the time to understand what the ancients were teaching. And I really like studying a lot of these ideas because they do help me to bypass what we have been taught traditionally, and in modern times. And in modern times, it is so fragmented. But I research the old stuff or the ancient stuff because there's a purity in it. But it's also a lot of times it's not written in the books. You really have to understand the symbolic language and really understand the framework of the symbolic language to extract that
Mm-hmm.
wisdom and knowledge from it.
Yes, that's a bold perspective, and one that challenges the speed and depth of how we view healing.
No, absolutely it does. And if you think about it, Saima, with the way I'm talking about paradoxical Heka, we can go through our difficulties. So let's just say somebody that is grieving, a loved one that has passed. A lot of times we can grieve those loved ones for years, and if we can be in pain for years, grieving a loved one. But with paradoxical Heka, we actually, but well, let me go back. So we can grieve it, and then there are some people who never get over the grief. But then there's a lot of people who do move beyond the grief, and they end up working to where that they can recognize that the person has passed, but also enjoy the time that they did have with that person and remember it. When they are able to do that, that's when they're literally able to, they actually stepped into the paradox where they accept that the person is not here with them physically anymore, but they can also enjoy the time that they had with them, and then that produces the peace within themselves. Okay, so with
Mm-hmm.
paradox with paradoxical Heka, this process now can be done instead of it taking years. You can literally teach someone this process, and they can do that. They can make that shift in literally minutes. You can literally, instead of living in that conflicted state, where you're sad, you're in grief, you're bitter, you're anger, you literally process it in a way that you reconcile it and become at peace with yourself.
That makes a lot of sense, Reginald. Now, at the heart of metaphysics is sovereignty. So, why is reclaiming sovereignty so essential for lasting transformation?
Oh man, great question. Great question. Because it is really important that you have sovereignty over your being. And a lot of times what happens is we end up farming out our power. We give it away to our institutions, we give it away to our jobs, we give it away to other people. Okay. But when you become sovereign, that means that you are the sovereign, you are the ruler of you in a sense. So that is the absolute foundation that anyone should start from, is that they are the standard for their life, for creating their life based on the ideas that they want and how they want to live their life. So create life on your terms. And the only way you can do that is from a place of sovereignty, of you realizing that you are the ruler of you, of your being.
Mm-hmm. I love the way you frame that. It really shows that how sovereignty isn't just a lofty concept, I'll say, but the foundation for any kind of real and lasting transformation. And when we reclaim that inner authority, Reginald, we stop waiting for outside approval or solutions and instead recognize our own power to shape the path forward. And that perspective is so grounding and liberating at the same time. And I think it's something listeners can carry with them after this conversation. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you put that in a great way, a beautiful way as well, Simon, that it is liberating when you're able to basically, ground yourself really in who you are. And really
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it comes down to just appreciating who you are, loving you and recognizing from that place of love and appreciation of yourself that you are worthy to be, not because somebody has approved of you or not, but because you see you as worthy, as an aspect of the source expressing itself as a human being for this short time.
Yes, absolutely. Now, like, how might someone know they're living sovereignly rather than under borrowed scripts?
Oh, I love that question. I love that question. And I use this very, very simple tool to help with that, Saima, is that our soul, when we're expressing from our soul, is very, very evident. Okay. And the soul lives in a state of joy and peace. Okay. So the way that you know that you are living sovereignly is when you are living and moving through life, and you're able to tap into that joy and peace. You're able to be that. Okay. So what I like to say is you let joy be your guide. And what that means is that whenever the joy becomes the baseline for where you want to be, and if you know if you are aligned or not. So when you are aligned with your path, your chosen path as a soul, then you're going to be joyful. That's how you're going to exist day to day. When you're misaligned, that's when you're going to be angry, sad, depressed. You're in a job you hate, or you're doing something, you're doing things that you don't like and enjoy. You're misaligned. So the simple way to recognize when you are on your path and you are living sovereignly is when you are at peace and enjoy moment to moment, day to day. That's the goal that you want to be in. And it's a simple way to recognize it. If you're in joy, you're on the right path. If you're sad, angry, you're not. It's that simple, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's such a refreshing way to put it, Reginald. So often we measure whether we are on the right path by external markers like success, status, or what others expect of us. But the way you frame sovereignty as being able to live in joy and to let that joy guide us feels so much more authentic and life giving. It's a reminder that sovereignty isn't about control or rigidity again, but about to allow ourselves to align with what truly lights up. And I think that perspective takes a lot of pressure off and helps people realize that joy itself can be a compass for living in that truth.
Yes, yes. And I think one of the biggest problems or reasons that we don't do that is that, Simons, we don't trust ourselves, and we're taught not to trust ourselves. But really it is really in what psychologists will call, I'm talking about living life from an internal locus of control. Because we're taught a lot of times to let the outside world be the validation and dictate for us. But when you're living through your joy, and you're letting that be your guide, then that is an internal locus of control. And that is where you and your life becomes the standard for anything you do in your life, and not somebody else's ideas or expectations of
Mm-hmm. Yes, I could not agree more. Yes. No, so Reginald, one last message you would like to leave for our listeners.
it. So I would say one last message is that, to surrender means that you reconcile. It doesn't mean that it's passive. And to really allow joy to be your guide. And when you can do that, life will be magical.
Mm, beautifully said, Reginald. And that was a truly enlightening conversation. You showed us that paradox isn't a problem to solve, but a portal to freedom. By reclaiming sovereignty and working with the deeper architecture of our being, transformation becomes not only possible but inevitable. So, listeners, take a breath, step into your own heka, and begin designing the life that is truly yours. Until next time, keep expanding your horizons. And Regina,